Alright, this time I decided to bring my favorite breakfast to life in Blender, so like last time I'll cover the modeling, sculpting and shading and no wrapping involved. So right off the bat, let me say this, the modeling part was pretty straightforward as you can see. Nothing too challenging, just a couple of loop cuts and it was good to go. I don't think I'll be doing it much more either, since I'm more into things like props and characters. Anyway, once I got to this point, I applied the subdivision surface modifier and added a few loop cuts to refine the shape a bit, as you can see here. And that was that. I even duplicated the model just in case, but I didn't end up needing it. If I hadn't duplicated it, I probably would have messed something up. Alright, so I went ahead and named the models, applied the modifiers and made sure to apply the scale with Ctrl A. Then I remeshed the model since I wanted to use fine textures for the material. Creating the bread shader was a bit like the cake shader I made in the last video, but with a few changes. If you missed that one, you can check it out at the end of this video. I started with a Voronoi texture and add a color ramp to add a subtle texture to the bread and get the base color down. I tend to mess around with material colors quite a bit, so don't be surprised if you see me adjusting them a lot. I went with two close cream tones and added a bump node to highlight the color difference a bit more. By the way, make sure you set the displacement in the material tab to displacement only and switch the render engine to cycles so everything displays properly. And also connect this one to the height input. Okay, I turned up the subsurface quite a bit and adjusted the settings as shown. Then it was time to add more details. With displacement node, I used the noise texture to create smaller details on the bread surface. Something about the size. Heads up, the values I used in this video might change later, so you'll find the final node screenshots in the video description. Alright, I added a color ramp to the noise to crank up its intensity and making it look a bit rougher. I switched the ramp mode to constant to get sharper details from the noise instead of smooth ones. Now, as you can see in this reference image, I needed to add some larger hole to give it more of a realistic look. I should say the final result didn't match the picture exactly, but it got pretty close. So I added another Voronoi node and adjusted the black areas with a color ramp to make those details pop a bit more. And also scaled them down and brought them closer together for better effect. Then I combined these two nodes using a mixed color node and fiddled with the parameters until I got a result to look right. So it was okay, but still felt too uniform, so I added some randomness by mixing in another Voronoi node with a noise node. And in the end, I combined everything with one last mix color node, usually set to linear light blending mode, because it enhances contrast nicely. This almost gave me what I wanted. Here I also added an area light just to check out the texture details better. Then I tightened the remesh settings a bit to bring out the finer details. Happy with the result, I moved on to the bread crust, which needed a different material. I selected the crust area, expanded the selection a little with Ctrl+, and created a simple brown material for it. I didn't spend too much time on this since it wouldn't be very visible in the final render. Just tweaked the principal BSTF settings like the main bread, added a bit of noise and slight displacement, and that was it. So for the peanut butter, I used the hemisphere and scaled it a bit to fit on the bread. And after remeshing it, I started sculpting. But here's the thing I didn't pay attention to. Blender warned me my model scale was non-uniform. Pay attention to the warnings, folks, and don't be like me. Now, as you can see, my brush wasn't a perfect circle. It was a bit oval, and that's because of the scaling issue. Anyway, despite that, I continued to sculpt and spread the peanut butter over the bread, softening the surface a bit to get a better result. I actually used grab and inflate brushes to accentuate the edges, and just then I remembered to apply this model scale. And now I had to create the texture on the model, which I mostly did using the cloth brush and of course the draw sharp brush to layer it up. But these layers needed to have a curved knife spread look like in these photos, so this could be achieved using the rotate or snake hook brushes. Just a little finesse is required, and using a pen and a bigger brush size really helps with the outcome. So I set the sculpt aside and moved on to creating the shader. I started with a noise node to simulate those red dots on the peanut butter and define its color. I had to fiddle with the parameters and switch up the mode to get a good result. And of course, subsurface scattering is a must-have for most food items. And also decreasing roughness for this case. I really wish there were a website that had all of these like roughness, IOR, subsurface, for everything ready to go. Does such a thing exist? Please help me. So for those little specks on the peanut butter, I thought it would be better to use displacement. The displacement only option definitely needs to be activated for sure. Either that or this section. So here I added another Voronoi and a color ramp, which really helps in creating these kind of details. And I'm happy they're so variable. And here I tried to create two types of detail on the surface so it wouldn't look too uniform, and I mixed them up with a color mix. The details didn't show up on the model, which meant it needed more geometry. So I remeshed it again, adjusted the blending mode and other values a bit, and tested this process a few times until I got the desired result. And that's the beauty of procedural materials that give you different options to play with. Okay, I finally decided it was time to sculpt a bit more to get closer to reality. I tried to spread it out a bit more on the bread. I experimented a lot to see what looked best. I also wanted to give it more doughy look. For that, I used the snakehook brush again, and I was slowly getting there. I think I really need a masterclass as a sculpting. Okay, after all that effort, we got to the jam, or jelly. I have to say my favorite is carrot jelly, but I picked this one because the color is so appealing. So I just duplicated the previous model, scaled it down, and used another noise node to create a bit of distortion along with two variable colors, bright red and dark red. I kept the roughness really low to make it shiny and cranked up the subsurface scattering to the max. I wasn't sure if that was the right move, but I went for it. And of course the same old story with the bump node, but at a low intensity this time. Those spots needed to be inverted, so I swapped the colors around. But since the jelly is transparent, I had to enable transmission and increased it all the way. I also adjusted the coordinates. Then I used noise again to create a new texture and control the displacement based on that. And I needed to relax the model a bit to reduce its resemblance to the peanut butter model. After that, I added another Voronoi node to combine the bumps created by the noise, tested a few different options, and finally mixed them together using a color mix. And of course, I had to enable displacement only to see the changes. In the end, with a few tweaks of some parameters, I think I finally reached the desired result. I'll repeat that some of these values might have changed in the final render, and the final screenshot of the nose is in the description of this video. Alright, now I moved on to the final sculpt of the jam, or jelly, to spread it on the surface and give it a more natural look. Keep in mind that when you remesh, some parts of the model might become jagged, which you needed to control through the shader. And in the end, I decided to remove one of the noise nodes since it wasn't essential and use the one above it. And the color ramp node I added at the end is optional. You can skip it. I actually minimized its effect in the final render. Okay, that's the final change. And now on to the last step, quickly making this type of sandwich. First, I put everything in a collection called whole and duplicated it, naming the duplicate slice. Then I hit the first one to use the second one for cutting. Next, I use the line trim tool on the models. The only issue I encountered was with the edges of the bread, some parts turned black, so I remeshed the model again and smoothed the edges a bit, which almost solved the problem. I did tweak the shader a little, but not too much. The smoothing helped a lot with those edges. I obviously had to reselect these areas and apply the curst shader to them, and nothing special there. And finally, I had to do a bit more sculpting on the materials on the bread, and I was nearly done. For this, I mostly used the grab and inflate brushes. And at last, I duplicated the slice of bread I had, did some scene setup, and this was the final result. Then in Photoshop, I made some adjustments to the light and color, created a background, a gradient background for it, though I'm still not sure if it fits or not. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this, and if you'd like to support me, please like the video and subscribe.